Hello, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel. I'm sorry for any background noises that you hear in this video. There's a lot going on in the world today, but today I really wanted to film this today. And today I'm very excited because I'm going to be filming my most surprising books of 2021. And if you didn't know what I mean by surprising, I guess these are the books that I went into with literally no expectations or really low expectations, and then I ended up loving them. Some of them were like really outside of my comfort zone, like something that I don't usually pick up, so I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it. And some of them were just like, I don't know, I guess I had heard negative reviews or I just wasn't hearing much about them, and so I went into it not really knowing what I was getting myself into. Or some of them were also by authors that I previously didn't enjoy one of their other books, so I kind of went into it thinking that I wasn't gonna enjoy it very much. And if you didn't know, this video is part of a 4 video series that I do at the end of the year with my most disappointing, most surprising, best and worst of the year. And so I already have my most disappointing went up, so I will link that down below if you wanted to see the most disappointing. And then very soon here I'll be posting my best and worst of the year, so you can look forward to those. But yeah, these are just the books that surprised me the most. Some of these books do cross over on my best of the year list, but these were the ones that I guess I just went into with really low expectations or no expectations. So I figured I'd start with the ones that were the least surprising and then make my way up to the ones that were the most shocking that I enjoyed them. So the first book that I have on this list is The Good Lie by A.R. Torre, and I think the reason why this one surprised me so much is because I had previously read, I think it was called like The Ghostwriter or something by this author, and that was like a 1-star, like one of my worst books that I read a few years ago. And so I went into this one with pretty low expectations, but my friend Matt was like telling me that he thinks I would really love this book because of the vibes in this book. And so I finally read it, and I'm so glad that I did because this one ended up surprising me so much. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, I think, but this one has a really great creepy thriller atmosphere. It's so good the way that this author like ties together these stories, and it's just very complex. It's like about a lot of, you know, young boys in their town that are getting killed by the serial killer, and it's just very intense. It's just very well written, and I had a really great time reading this one. It kept me on the edge of my seat the whole time. Another one of my favorite thrillers that I picked up this year was Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. This is one that I actually read because of your thriller recommendations, mainly my friend Haley. And this is one that I think I just went into with pretty low expectations because this cover has never really appealed to me when I like see the book. It kind of looks like a romance book cover, at least to me. So like this cover has never really grabbed my attention, and so for that reason I've never really been interested in reading this book, even though I never actually read the premise, so I didn't really know what it was even about. But this cover never like looked like a thriller to me, so I was just never interested in reading this book, especially the title Jar of Hearts. It kind of makes it sound like it's a romance book. But oh my god, was I wrong. This book was such an intense, amazing thriller, like a 5-star thriller, one of my faves of the year. And I was just so surprised by how much I love this, especially because I listened to this entire book on audio, which is something I rarely do for thrillers because I enjoy the suspense of like reading a thriller with my eyes and like flipping the pages and like the suspense of like knowing what's coming up next. But this was just as thrilling on audio, which I think says a lot because I was just so gripped into like what I was listening to. I just couldn't stop listening to it. It was just so good. The next book that I have on this list is going to be a romance novel because it's called What If You and Me, and this one was so surprising because I went into this one not even knowing what it was about. I actually listened to this book on audio when I was on a road trip this summer. I was just looking through my Libro like backlog of books that I had on Libro because I was like, I want to listen to something on audio today because it was a long car ride, you know? It was like I can finish the entire audiobook in one car ride kind of car ride. And then I just saw this book and I was like, I mean, okay, I'll just put it on, and like I wasn't really expecting anything. And this ended up being like a 5-star romance book, like so freaking cute, one of my fave romances. And I guess I just really wasn't expecting that when I put this on. Like I just kind of put this on as something to like pass the time, and I ended up loving it, being so invested. I love that this romance follows a female protagonist who's a horror author. Like how freaking cool. And then her love interest in this book is a retired firefighter. Like, are you kidding me? And this book is just so cute. Like I absolutely love the way that the romance is done in this book. I just think it was done so beautifully, and he's like the perfect love interest because he's like always asking for consent and like making sure that she's comfortable, and it just made me swoon so many times. Yeah, it's one of my favorite romances that I read this year, and I was just smiling the whole car ride. Like the whole car ride went by so fast. I was in the car for like 5.5 hours, and it felt like it went by in a blip because of this book. It was so cute. Another book that I was pretty surprised by how much I enjoyed it is Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, and I think the main reason why this one surprised me is because this book is really like a slice of life. kind of story, and that's something that I usually don't enjoy, or at least it's very hit or miss for me. Like, I can think of a number of books off the top of my head that have this kind of slice of life writing style that I really don't enjoy, because usually it's like there's no plot and nothing's happening and it's so boring, you know? But with this one, I don't know, I loved the writing style. I immediately got into the lives of the characters. I love the fact that this main character is a TV news reporter. I've discovered that that's like one of my favorite things to watch on screen or to read about in books. I just absolutely love reading about that job. So that was another bonus about this book, but also I just really loved the main character and the way that this author writes. Like, her writing is just very relatable. It's easy to get into, and I'm really glad to know that this is going to be the first book in a series, and the next book is going to be coming out next year. So I'm excited to check out everything that this author writes in the future, because I really enjoyed this one and I was so surprised by how much I loved it. The next book on this list is another romance novel, because it's People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, and I was absolutely shocked that this ended up being a romance that I enjoyed as much as I did, for a couple of reasons. The main one being that, you know, Beach Read was one of my most anticipated books of last year, and then Beach Read ended up being about a 3-star read for me. So I was already kind of concerned, you know, I was like, okay, I don't want to get my hopes up with like Emily Henry books, because I don't know if her books are going to be for me or not. And then for the second reason is because this book is like a friends to lovers trope that's going on, and if you don't know my taste in romance, that's actually like one of my least favorite tropes. Like, I get so bored reading friends to lovers romance books. So this book, it was set up to be something that I wouldn't enjoy. Like, I was just knowing going into this one, I was like, all right, let's just give it a try. But, you know, I had really low expectations going into this, and this one ended up being like a 5-star, like one of my favorite romance books. I'm just like shocked. I'm just shocked that I love this book as much as I did. Emily Henry, like, wow. I will be reading everything Emily Henry does in the future. And Alex in this book is just such a freaking cinnamon roll. Like, I absolutely love him. I not only love the romance in this book, I love like the vacation, like escapism in this book, you know, because these two characters, they've been best friends since college, and every year in the summer together, they go on these like vacations together every summer. And so we get to see like the past 10 years of their lives since they've been in college, every summer vacation that they've taken together. So it's very like vacation vibes in this one, which is just perfect. It was just so cute, so beautiful. I shipped the romance so hard, which also rarely happens for me in friends to lovers. And I like the fact that we got to see flashbacks of like when they met and like how their relationship began. I think that's usually the issue with me with friends to lovers, is the fact that usually it's like they've just known each other their whole lives, and we don't really get to see like how they got to know each other and how they met in the first place. Like, that stuff is so important and essential to me in a romance. Like, I want to see the beginning of everything. I want to see all the inside jokes, you know? And this was just it was everything. It's gonna be my favorites of the year because I loved it so much. Okay, so the next book on this list is another one that ended up surprising me a lot, because I went into it not even really knowing what it was about and like what was going on, and that is A History of Wild Places. Holy baloney. Yeah, I just read this book in December, very recently, and this book has launched itself into my top favorite reads of the year. And that is because I went into this book not really understanding what this premise was even about. Like, this premise in my mind is kind of confusing, because it's like, oh, there's like this community of people, and there's this guy who can like touch objects and like know where people were, and it just sounded like it was going to be a little bit more fantasy than I was ready for, you know? Like, I didn't want that. But this book isn't really fantasy. It has like a touch of magical realism, but that's like about it. This book has a really interesting mystery going on in it, and that's the essential part of this story, and that's like the main thing happening in this. And I was absolutely immersed, like obsessed with this mystery. I was obsessed with this community of people and reading about them. I just thought that they were so fascinating. Not only that, but the writing. I will scream it from the rooftops that this book is gorgeously written. The writing is just haunting. It's beautiful. It made me care. It made me cry. At the end of this book, I cried. It was just a wonderful time. I was just so, like, this is the first book that I read physically without the help of the audiobook in such a long time, and I was able to fly through it so fast because I was just so invested. And then next up, I have Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, because as much as I was hoping, you know, I was hoping for years that this would be one that I would enjoy. But I guess I was just always nervous because I had actually tried to read this book 2 times previously and I only got like 50 pages in before I set it aside. So then this time I was like, okay, no, I'm just gonna get the audiobook and I'm just gonna push through the kind of like slower start to this book and just get through it. And I'm so glad that I finally did because I ended up enjoying this one so much. And so I guess I'm surprised that I enjoyed this one as much as I did because I was so nervous and because previously this book just hadn't been working out for me. But this one is really great. It's just like a post-apocalyptic kind of story that follows these people. I actually loved the storytelling style in this book because I love the fact that we go back and forth during different time periods, because I feel like usually with books that revolve around some kind of, you know, pandemic or like post-apocalyptic, like the world is coming to an end kind of thing, it usually only follows the characters like after the pandemic or after the events. But I really liked with this book, we got different parts of the book that would be different periods of time. So you would see like 20 years after the pandemic, and then you would see 5 years before the pandemic, and you would really get to know the characters in that way. And this book was just written so beautifully. Like I loved all the discussions in this book about life and like what makes life worth living, and it was just really beautiful. Like it was stunning, it was amazing. I'm so glad I finally read it. And then next up is going to be The Haunting of Hill House. And I know you're probably like, why are you surprised that you enjoyed this? Because you enjoy everything spooky, bitch. I had really low expectations going into this one for a number of reasons, mainly because this is a classic, and you know, my streak with classics, it's not great. I usually don't enjoy them, I usually get bored to tears and I want to DNF immediately, but thankfully that didn't happen with this one, so that was already pretty surprising. And then also because I am obsessed with the Haunting of Hill House TV show as the Netflix series, you know? It's one of my all-time, like maybe top 3 favorite TV shows to ever exist, and so after I was saying that, a lot of people were telling me they don't think I would like this book because the book is just so different from the show. That's like all I was hearing, is that the book is just so different, you're not gonna like the book. So because of all those comments, I literally went into this book thinking I'm probably not gonna enjoy it, and I was like trying to set my expectations really low. And while I will say I don't enjoy this book as much as the show, like you weren't wrong about that, but I'm still surprised by how much I enjoyed this book. I loved the atmosphere in this, and honestly, like the writing didn't feel that old to me, which I know is shocking because I think this book came out in like the 1950s, which, you know, it was a pretty decent amount of time ago, and usually classics from that time period do usually bore me, but this one was just so interesting. Like I don't know what it was about it, but like Shirley Jackson's writing was just so good. And I just feel like she was so ahead of her time. These characters were so interesting. They were the same as the characters in the show for the most part, but some of them, like they had some different personality traits that were different from the show. Like they weren't exact carbon copies. And I don't know, I was just really surprised that I loved this one as much as I did. And I'm so happy that I did because like freaking The Haunting of Hill House, it's a classic and I loved it. Like great for me, that's awesome. And then same goes for And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is another one, you know, this is a classic. This one came out in like the 1940s, I think. So this one's like even more back there. And I just was not sure, especially because I had actually DNF'd this book once before, about 60 pages in, because the writing style is a lot. Like, and I will still say that the writing style is an adjustment, you know, especially if you're not used to something like this, which I'm certainly not. I would highly recommend, if you're struggling with this writing style, to get the audiobook, because the audiobook was so great. It was like this dude who was like narrating it in this very like old school American mysterious voice that just made it so fun. It made it feel like a classic murder mystery, which it is. It just made it feel so much more fun, and it had the perfect vibes. I love the fact that it's like these 10 strangers that get lured to this island, and then it's just like one by one they start getting picked off one by one. Somebody's murdering all these people, and it's just so intense. Wow, for this book to come out that long ago and have this good of a plot twist, like there's a reason people are still talking about this book today, you know? And it's because of that plot twist at the end. The ending is impossible to predict. It's just so good. And then next up is A Lot's Away by Darcy Little Badger. And this is another one that I'm shocked that I enjoyed this one as much as I did, because this book is way out of my comfort zone. Because this one is light fantasy, you know? It's not like hardcore fantasy, but it is light fantasy because we're following this family who has these different abilities. Like our main character, A Lot's Away, she has the ability to do certain things. Just wanted to make sure that it actually tells you what she does so that I'm not spoiling you, but it does say she can raise the ghosts of dead animals. That's pretty cool. That's pretty fantasy-ish. And also it says she lives in a slightly stranger America. This isn't too fantasy because it's not like a completely different world. It is America in this book, but there's just some fantasy things in this book. Like vampires exist and like elves exist, I think, and just like, you know, there's fantastical elements to this. So because of those reasons, I was just really nervous going into this one. You know, I wasn't sure if it was gonna be my thing or not, because me and fantasy, we don't vibe. But oh my god, this book was so great. It was so much fun. This writing was so great. I also just loved Alatue as a main character. I mean, she's asexual, which is pretty cool, and I wasn't expecting that representation going into this book. And you know, that's pretty awesome to see more representation like that, especially for someone like me who identifies as asexual, and I appreciate it, you know? I also think there's a really great mystery happening in this book regarding Alatue's cousin. There's an event at the beginning of this book that happens, and then the rest of the story is kind of her trying to figure out what actually happened. There's like a really cool mystery aspect to this book as well, which I was not expecting. And it was just really fun. Like, I thought it was a really fun, well-written, cute adventure story with some really, like, heavy themes at times. Alright, my second most surprising book that I read this year was Follow Me to Ground. Ooh! This one was surprising because it is a horror novel, but it's a fantasy horror novel. And, you know, once again, fantasy's complicated. I have a complicated relationship with fantasy, so I wasn't sure how I was gonna feel about this one, but this book was just so freaking cool. It was so cool. I'm kind of obsessed with this premise, and I feel like this is one that I could potentially reread in the future because I'm just so obsessed with it, and it's so short. And this is like one of the few times that I wish this short book was just a little bit longer. You know, I could have used it just a little bit more. But in this story, it's so fascinating because we're following this girl named Ada and her dad, and they both have these like abilities to heal people in their town, and that's pretty much as far as the fantasy aspect in this book goes. That is the fantastical thing. So you see, I think my thing with fantasy is that I don't like fantasy that's like a completely different universe and world that I have to learn about, and like dragons and creatures and things. Like I don't know, like my brain cannot handle that. But I like really light fantasy that takes place in our world where characters are able to do something that's just a little fantasy-ish, that's just a little mysterious and weird. I also think with this one, it's just like a really captivating, interesting story. Like I just immediately loved this writing style. This writing style is so unique and it's so strange at times. I mean, it does do that kind of annoying thing where there's no quotation marks around the dialogue, but it also does have these little like lines whenever there is dialogue, so it's not like super confusing to know like when is somebody talking and when are they just like not. I don't know, I thought this book was so great, and I just was not expecting for this to be like a 4.5 or 5 star for me when I started it. I didn't think I was gonna love it that much, but I did. And then the last book, the number one most surprising book for me this year, it has to be A Dowry of Blood, okay? Because I wasn't even planning on reading this book, okay? This was not a book that I would have read myself because the premise of it did not sound that interesting to me, to be honest. I actually only ended up reading this book because I wanted to do the video of like reading the top 10 horror Goodreads nominations, and I only had to read 2 books, and this book was one of them. So I was like, okay, I'll just give it a shot. If I don't like it, I just won't like it, you know? But I was not expecting to love this book the way that I did. Like, this was a freaking 5-star book for me, and I'm so glad that I read it because of these Goodreads awards, because I literally would have never read this if it wasn't for that. So that's really cool. But this was so surprising because the general premise of this book is that we're following one of the brides of Dracula. So it's kind of like a reimagining of Dracula, but it's also like her kind of like figuring out herself and her life, and then it's kind of like horror vibes still because they're vampires, and usually vampires make me like really squeamish and just like grossed out to read about, and this wasn't, you know, too different because of that. There were definitely moments in this book where I was like, ooh, but I just thought this book was so good. It was just so well written, which is not something I was really anticipating. Like, there were some quotes in this book I was like highlighting left and right in this freaking ebook. I was obsessed with the writing style. It was very thoughtful, very thought-provoking, very interesting, very like erotic, but just beautiful. It was so good. And so yeah, I think if you enjoy, you know, horror that involves vampires, or even if you don't, like, just give this book a shot, you know? I just read the first chapter, see a sample of the writing because it is gorgeous. Alright, so those are all of the most surprising books that I read in 2021. I had quite a bit, like, as you can see from this list, it was quite a bit of books that surprised me this year. This is why it's so great to read books that you're not always sure about, you know, because sometimes every now and then they'll surprise you, and I love that. Like, there's no better feeling in the world than going into a book not really knowing what you're getting yourself into or not really knowing what to expect, and then just freaking loving it, and having that book remind you why you love reading in the first place, it's just a really great feeling, you know? It's a rare feeling, but every now and then it happens with these books and it's amazing. It makes reading all the stinkers worth it, you know? So thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have any books that surprised you the most this year. I would love to know what they were. And also, if you've read any of these books on this list and you were also really surprised by them, I would love to know. Or of course, if I convinced you to read any of these books now, I would love to know that as well. Well, thank you so much for watching, and you can look forward to my best and worst coming very soon after this video. And thanks for watching and hanging out, and I'll see you very soon in another video. Bye!